So my name is Corie Rice, and I'm the program specialist at Montana Wild here in Helena. Do you know, is everybody tuned in from Helena today, or are we all over the state? I can't remember. We don't know.
Mostly probably from right around here is what I would guess.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Montana Wild, but it's the education center for fish, wildlife, and parks. So it's the only education center for the agency in the state. And so what we do here is we get field trips from around the state. We're able to offer a transportation and lodging grant for those schools, which is really great because we're able to get schools from all over the state. They'll sometimes spend a night out at Canyon Ferry or somewhere in town, and then come and do a full day of conservation education with us. So fishing, archery, raptor programs, mammal programs, all sorts of fun stuff. And then we're also open to the public Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. So folks can just come in, look at the fish tanks. We have big, beautiful native fish tanks with pallid sturgeon and cutthroat and rainbow trout, pumpkin seeds, lots of fun species in there. We also have snakes and salamanders and just some really great exhibits to look at. So that's a great resource as well as a brand new birding exhibit. So if there's any birders in this group, that's a great resource to kind of practice your bird ID, is to look at that exhibit. It's both photos and mounts of birds. So that's a pretty cool new addition to our exhibit hall here. And then on top of all that, we also have a wildlife rehabilitation center. So we are one of the only state-run wildlife rehab centers in the country, which is pretty unique. So we take in injured and orphaned animals from across the state, mostly birds. We are permitted to take in some other species like bears and mountain lions and bobcats if they're under a year old. And then black bear cubs, we'll rehab and release those. Some species we cannot release, and so we find appropriate long-term homes for them, wildlife sanctuaries, things like that. But the number one goal is always to release animals back out into the wild. So again, we get mostly birds in, and we get a lot of raptors in. So raptors are a particular kind of bird. The kids always, when I ask them what raptors are, they always say dinosaurs. We're not talking about the dinosaurs, although, you know, birds technically are dinosaurs or related to, right? But so raptors are birds of prey. So they're predatory birds that are hunting for and killing other animals for prey, for food. So there's a few things that make raptors really unique and adapted to be able to hunt in this way. Three main things that scientists say that make raptors really special and unique. And two of those can be seen on the head. So we're going to talk about raptors in general before we kind of dive into a specific type of raptor. But so this is a head, a model of a skull of a golden eagle. And so the first thing that all raptors have that's really unique is this really nice pointed beak. So you got to think this golden eagle, for example, might be hunting for something as large as a coyote or even a fawn, big rabbit. And so with this mouth, they obviously couldn't swallow them whole, right? But they don't have silverware, knives and forks out in the wild to cut it up. So this beautiful curved beak acts as raptors' silverware. So all raptors have this really nice curved beak. The second thing also located on their head is really amazing eyesight. So all raptors have incredible eyesight. They have really high visual acuity, which just means they can see really clearly from really far away. So a lot of people assume they have almost binocular vision. They can make things look closer. That's not the case. They can't like zoom in, but they can just see really, really clearly from a very far distance, which again is really helpful if you're soaring way above the sky and trying to see a rabbit or a mouse going through a field, right? So all raptors have really, really amazing eyesight. The third thing that all of our raptors have in common is on their feet, and it is talons. So right here, I have an osprey foot. And for those of you who know, osprey eat only fish, right? There are fish eaters. Yep. And so you can see these are like perfect fish hooks for an osprey to be able to catch a fish. They also have really rough patch on the bottom of their foot, which is really helpful for catching fish. But all raptors have some sort of talons. They're extremely strong. The word raptor actually comes from a word that means to seize. And so all raptors, this is generally what they're using to catch and to kill their prey. The back talon on a raptor's foot is called a hallux. It's really long, and that's usually what they're actually kind of delivering the kill shot with, right? So they kill their prey just with that extreme pressure and that really long hallux from in their talons. Now, with each species of raptor, they're going to be on top of those three amazing tools, they're going to have really specific adaptations just depending on where they live, what they're hunting, and how they survive out in the wild. So we're really lucky in Montana. We have 6 different sort of categories of raptors. And so we have owls, eagles, falcons, vultures, hawks, and osprey. So we have 6 different types that you can see. And then within each of those different categories of raptors, there's many, many different species of raptors that you can see. So the topic we're actually going to focus on today is owls. And again, we're very lucky in Montana because we have 15 species of owls that you can see here, which is a huge amount of owls, right? And they range from huge, like our great horned or great gray owls. And then we have little tiny ones like this guy right here. This is just a mounted one, but this is our smallest owl species, the pygmy owl. So they come in all shapes and sizes, but we're going to kind of talk about some of their similarities and adaptations that they have. But yeah, we have 15 different types of owls you can find here. And that is just, we're kind of smack in the middle of a lot of the edges of different owls ranges. So we're at the very southern portion of a northern hawk owl's range, for example, but we're at the very northern tippy top range of a barn owl. So we just happen to kind of pick up all these ranges of these different owl species, which allows us to be able to see many different owl species, which is very awesome. So owls in general, we again have 15. So owl ID can be a little bit tricky, but when we're thinking about owls in general, one way when you're out, so if you're out birding, you see a bird you don't know of, it's important to take mental notes or even physical notes if you can. Picture's always best, but we don't always have a good camera that can get a good picture, right? So when you're taking mental notes about owls, one of the first things you want to decide is, does it have tufts, feather tufts on its head? So think of our classic great horned owl, or does it have a rounded head? That's one big distinction that can help us narrow down our owls because, you know, about half have tufts, some have round heads. So that can help us right off the bat determine. So this little pygmy owl has a round head. It doesn't have any feather tufts sticking up on top of its head. Another thing you want to take note of when you're looking at owls is bill color. So you can see this little pygmy owl has a nice yellowish bill. And then the boreal owl that looks really pretty similar to this guy would have a dark bill. So again, kind of hard to get that close and tell with owls, but bill color and eye color are 2 other factors that can be really helpful in identifying owls when you go back and look at a field guide. So again, those are kind of the main things that you want to look for when you're identifying owls is rounded or tuft head and the color of eyes and the color of bills. So I can tell you all about these adaptations using these little models all I want, but I don't think there's any more effective model to show you all the amazing owl adaptations than an owl itself. So I am going to kind of switch over to my little camera over here, and I'm going to get our owl to model for us. So let's see if I can get this to work first. And we might hear this owl vocalize. So everybody keep your ears open. She can be pretty vocal. So let's see. All right. So you might have heard a couple little vocalizations from her, but this is our Western screech owl. So again, one of the 15 owl species that we have here in Montana. And this is Kyla, like who we were just talking about. But yeah, so she is a Western screech owl. Kind of funny that they're called screech owls because they do not screech. If you heard her little vocalization at the beginning when I was grabbing her, and she might do it again for us, but they do more of a tooting sound. So they'll say toot, 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 toot. So yeah, again, they don't screech, but this is one of the species that we find more on the western part of the state. And they primarily live in cottonwood bottoms. So they love places like drainages, places with lots of cottonwoods. These are cavity nesters. So they're not really building their own nest. They're utilizing woodpecker holes, old cavities in trees, and sort of just nesting on whatever happens to be in the bottom of that cavity. So a big thing that's helpful for a lot of our cavity nesters, which many of our owl species are, is leaving old snags up, right? Because those are what woodpeckers generally work on and make nice cavities where these guys can nest. So a few other owl adaptations that she's really great at modeling for us. So first of all, remember I said tufts or no tufts is something you want to look at. She's pretty nervous, so she's actually kind of hiding her tufts, but she does indeed have little ear tufts on the top of her head. You might be able to see them. Scientists think they use those not only for communication. So if any of you have cats, you might notice when they're really nervous, their ears might flatten against their head or they turn them all around. So they might use those for communication. And they also use them for camouflage. So when they pop them up really straight, it sort of breaks up their outline. And so they can blend in with the trunk of a tree even more. Now, excuse me, another kind of good sign that you're looking at an owl is a giant head, right? So if you look at her body, her head is like proportionately about half of her body, which is makes them look really cute generally, but can also look really intimidating. But they need that huge head because they have huge eyes and huge ears. Most of our owls in Montana are nocturnal. Not all of our owls, but most of our owls are nocturnal. And so that really incredible eyesight and hearing is crucial for finding prey at night. So owl eyes are so big in their head and they're not circular like ours. They're not eyeballs like we have. They're shaped almost like a little cocktail weenie. So they're kind of tubular shaped. They go way back into their head. And that is to allow as much light into their head, their eyes as possible. But that means since they're so big and they're so long, they really aren't able to turn their eyes at all. So their eyes are stuck facing straight forward in their head. So you and I, if we keep our head facing perfectly straight, we can look to the left, we can look to the right, we can roll our eyes, but this owl cannot do that. And so they have to be able to turn their head really, really far, right? We've all heard that owls can turn their heads really far. The kids always think they can turn it all the way around. That's not quite the case because then everything would kind of get tangled up inside. So they can turn their heads 270 degrees though. So that would be like if you could turn your head over one shoulder, back behind you, and over the other shoulder. So they're able to do that because if you feel the back of your neck, we have little bones, little vertebrae called cervical vertebrae. And you and I have 7 of those. Most mammals do, giraffes do, mice do, but owls have 14. So they have twice as many little bones in the back of their neck. She's modeling this well for me right now. And so because they have twice as many bones, it gives them a lot more movement so they can turn their head super duper far. Now you'll see on her face, she has this really prominent circle around her face, and that's called a facial disc. Now that also really helps with her hearing. And so it acts like basically a big satellite dish that funnels sound right into her ears. And her ears are located right behind that facial disc. They're big, huge holes in the side of her head. And a lot of owls have asymmetrical ears. So actually one is up high and one is down low on the other side of the skull. So that allows them almost to hear in 3D. So they could be, you know, sitting up on a tree branch and hear a mouse scurrying below a couple feet of snow and even tell how deep it is. So they have really, really incredible hearing, really incredible eyesight. But something interesting to note about them is they don't have very good close-up eyesight. So you can see on Kyla, she has all these little whiskers right around her beak. And so most owls have really poor close-up vision. So those little whiskers allow them to sort of sense what's right in front of them, sense what they're biting, what they're feeding on. And so it almost looks like she doesn't have much of a curved beak, but she certainly does. Under all those feathers, she has a very prominent curved beak that, again, she uses as sort of her silverware when she catches prey. So she also obviously has amazing camouflage. We've all probably walked by an owl in our lives and just never even known because they blend right in. She looks exactly like tree bark to me. So she has that incredible camouflage. And then way down on her feet is one of the tools we talked about, which is talons, right? So even though she's pretty tiny, I still wear a pretty decent glove when I'm holding her because she has those really strong, sharp talons. And something she's modeling, again, perfectly for me right now, is most raptors are kind of stuck with their talons in the arrangement of 3 in the front and 1 in the back. So that one hallux in the back. Owls and osprey, so that other talon I showed you at the beginning, owls and osprey are the only 2 that can switch up the arrangement like she's modeling for us right now. So they can have 2 in the front and they can swivel 2 to be in the back. So 2 in the front, 2 in the back, or she can switch it around and have 3 in the front and 1 in the back. Now that's really helpful for a nocturnal predator because when you're hunting at night and you swoop down to grab your prey, you better be pretty sure you're going to grab it and hold on to it, because if it disappears into the night, it's going to be really hard to find again. All right, I'm going to switch up my camera so I can sort of point some things out to you again. So you can see she's fairly small, but if we compare her to our smallest owl, she's pretty big. So this is our pygmy owl. This is our western screech owl. So she's significantly larger than the smallest owl. And there's a couple in between these 2 even. So again, we have a huge range of owl sizes and habitats as well. So we have some generalist species. So the great horned owl, for example, if anybody's seen an owl, it's almost always a great horned owl. And that's because they're, again, generalists. So they are not too particular about habitat as long as there's places for them to nest, there's food for them to catch. But I went to Montana State in Bozeman. We had 2 nesting right above a class that I walked into every day. So they're, you know, very comfortable around people, not too picky. Then we have species like a great gray owl. So those are specialists. They're super particular about habitat, generally only old growth forests, deep in the mountains, deep in the forests. So less likely to see those guys. Another specialist species we have is the short-eared owl. That's one of our diurnal or daytime owls as well. So again, not all of our owls are nocturnal. This little guy, the smallest one, is, oh, she was tooting there for you. Sorry, are you a little nervous about that owl? I'll put it away. But that little pygmy owl is also one of our daytime owls. But again, the short-eared owl, that's a prairie owl. So really in particular nests and breeds in grasslands and prairies, and they actually nest on the ground. So while all our owls have really good vision, big round heads, a lot of similarities, again, just depending on where they're living and feeding, they're gonna act really differently and breed really differently. So yes, this is our western screech owl. A lot of owls, we still don't know a ton about them. They're really, really hard to study because they're extremely elusive. They are, again, mostly nocturnal and very good at hiding. So we don't know a ton about this species range. We know they're mostly in western Montana, but they are they can be found like in Bozeman. We're not exactly sure how far east they go or what exactly their interaction is with the eastern screech owl, which again, we're not exactly sure how far west eastern screech owls come. So there's still a ton we need to learn about owls and their distribution, and how the growth of populations in Montana, human populations, is going to affect their habitats and ranges. So one other thing I definitely want to talk about, Kyla produced this today. So this is a pellet, and owl pellets. Whenever I want to talk about owl pellets, somebody always inevitably says, ew, owl poop, but they are not poop. It is not throw up. It is a pellet that they cast. Falconers would call it casting, but also they cough it up. So they're not very good at digesting fur and bones. And so they'll compact the undigestible parts of a meal together in their stomach using strong muscles, and then they'll cast or cough it up in a pellet. This is something that can help us to study owls because it can tell us what they're eating, how their diets change over the season, where they are in general. Something interesting though, is that not only owls cast pellets, most birds do. Tons and tons of different bird species. Pretty much all our raptors here, the kestrels, the eagle, they'll cast pellets, this big. But we always hear about owl pellets, right? I mean, I'm sure you've never heard of an American kestrel pellet, right? So there's a couple reasons for that. One is they don't have a crop like some species do. So they have less room to store food, which means they need to cast a pellet more regularly. Another reason is because they are swallowing their prey whole more often than some species. So, they'll swoop down, grab a mouse. She could fly up into a tree and just swallow it whole and digest it safely up off the ground. But something like a golden eagle, if they're tearing off just the good bits and pieces they want off a larger prey animal, there's less for them to have to cast up, less bones, less fur, that type of thing. So that's a big reason we see and hear about owl pellets more than a lot of other species pellets. One other really amazing adaptation for owls is they're really stealthy hunters. So there's generally two styles of huntings that owls do. They're perch and pounce. So they'll sit up in a tree, again, really use that amazing hearing and sight to figure out exactly where a prey is, and then swoop down and just pounce right on it. They can turn their talons in that orientation to just snatch them. Or they'll just glide over the ground. So this is a wing from a great horned owl. And owl wings in general, they're shorter and broader in comparison to their body than, say, a hawk or a falcon. If you imagine a falcon wing is really long and pointed, a hawk wing is longer, but still really broad, but longer for soaring. Owl wings are really broad and short, which is really good for gliding right over the ground at a really slow pace, a really slow movement, which is helpful for snatching things right off the ground. I'm gonna get a sip of water. Sorry, Kyla. She's like, what are you doing? But also on their wings, they're known for their silent flight as well, which is why if you're ever walking through the forest at night and you swear something went right over your head, it could have been an owl silently swooping by. But on the edge, the leading edge of their flight feathers almost looks like they have little eyelashes on their feathers. Hopefully you can see that. But that sort of acts as a buffer and breaks up the wind when they're swooping. If they do have to flap, it's totally silent. So it's another really cool adaptation that they have, is silent flight. That's also another reason why they look really fluffy. So this is pretty much all feathers. It kind of, first of all, a year-round resident of ours. So it acts as a nice insulator, keeps her really warm, but also again, kind of buffers that sound and makes her a really silent flyer. Awesome. Well, at this point, does anybody have questions about screech owl, Montana owls in general? You can unmute, and yeah, I'm open for questions. So
I have so many questions, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. So.
Why don't you kick it off?
Okay.
Give me a few at least.
So here's my first question.
Yes.
With the ever expanding like wildland urban interface that is in a lot of her habitat, right? Where do owls go when they are feeling like too much human pressure? And are they territorial like other like mammals, and is that becoming an issue?
Yeah, good question. So again, depends on the species, and some are much more territorial than others. Great horned owls are very territorial, mostly to other great horned owls, but there have been reports of them swooping down on people when they're nesting and things like that. But yeah, owls in general, most of our owl species go into coniferous forests. So they're deep in the forest, they're cavity nesters. Drainages is a huge place to find them. Here in Helena, like if you're driving up Grizzly Gulch or Davis Gulch, all those gulches, that's one of the only places I've ever seen a pygmy owl is sitting on a telephone wire in those drainages. So again, I mean, many prefer to be away from humans, but they can hear and see us coming from so far away that it's not very hard for them to avoid us. So.
Do any owls migrate?
Yeah, good question. Yes. So again, something that we don't have a ton of research on at all, but one, for example, the flammulated owl, which is this really cool little owl, a little smaller than this one, has dark black eyes. They think that owl migrates as far as down to Mexico. So we have a couple that might migrate pretty far, and then some will just do a local migration, right? So a lot of people think of migration as thousands and thousands of miles, but it can be as simple as spending the winter up on the, towards the top of Mount Helena and then moving out into the valley for the summer or something like that. So there can be local or shorter migrations as well. And that is still a lot of research that's being done by our biologists. There's a lot of increasing technology that will be really helpful for us as we're able to get our hands on it. Is like GPS trackers are so small now, you can get those on birds. We do a lot of bird banding. There's the Owl Institute in Montana does a ton of owl banding in general, but of course that requires catching that owl again, or somebody finding the owl after it's died and finding the band. So really tricky to study, but yes, long story short, some owls do migrate.
And maybe you addressed this, Corie, and I didn't hear it, so I apologize. Yeah. How did Kyla come to you guys?
Yeah, she has a wing injury. So you can kind of see her left wing. It looks like it's drooping a little bit. I honestly cannot remember the exact circumstances. And often we don't know, to be honest with you. People find animals and bring them into us. But a lot of the most common ones are collisions. So collisions with cars and collisions with windows, of course. A big one with cars is folks think that be like if you have an apple core or something and throw it out the window because it's going to degrade, right? But rodents, brings rodents out to the sides of roads. And these guys will definitely swoop down and try to eat those. And so, yeah, we get a lot that get hit by cars. And then cats for smaller owls like this is a huge one. We have a couple resident birds that can never be released now because of cats. And scientists estimate that 2 billion birds are killed every year by cats. So cats is a big one. Mice poisoning, rat poisoning is a huge one. You put out poison to kill mice and rats in your house. But the thing is, you don't know where they're going to end up or where they're going to die. So, they'll eat it and then scurry off, and they're moving a little slower. They're easier to catch. And that definitely impacts owls like this. And then, yeah, barbed wire fence, windmills. I mean, there's all kinds of things out there that make life a little harder for these guys. But a lot of those are things that we can easily fix or make small changes in our life, not letting your cat out or keeping an eye on them or putting stickers in your window. Because these guys are incredible rodent control for us. Raptors in general eat tons and tons of mice. A lot of our raptors eat grasshoppers and other insects, like American kestrels and Swainson's hawks eat so many grasshoppers, snakes. So a lot of the animals that we would like to, keep in check, these guys do that for us. So anything we can do to help their populations is also helpful for us.
Will they eat a carcass or do they need it fresh?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I haven't looked that up for this species in particular. Most raptors, not all, but a lot of raptors are pretty particular in wanting a fresh kill or like to kill the prey themselves. But some of them are opportunistic scavengers, so wouldn't turn down something like that. So I'd have to look it up in particular how often that happens with this species. But then of course we do have one raptor species that's an obligate scavenger, so only eats dead things, which is the turkey vulture. And eagles, of course, eat tons of dead things. So yeah, but I'm not exactly sure in particular with this species how often they might do that.
Is your arm, excuse me, is your arm tired? Like at the end of a presentation, is she heavy or?
No, she is so light. So again, she is all feathers. This species, I don't know what she weighed this morning. We weigh these guys every day, but this species usually weighs like 6 to 8 ounces. So, I mean, yeah, she weighs, it feels like I have a clementine on my hand maybe, but yeah, it's depending on the species. I mean, if I had a great horned owl, I might have to put it down by now, but even they only weigh 4 pounds. So these birds are mostly feathers, and bird bones, as you probably know, are really, really light as well. They're like honeycomb in structure. They have really light but strong bones. They don't have any teeth. They don't have a big bladder to hold on to a lot of that weight. So they're so light. So no, my arm does not hurt, but thank you.
So I know this is about owls, but you mentioned the golden eagle and I think it was just the golden eagle and it catching coyotes and fawns.
Yeah.
Are they a lot heavier than the owls to be able to do that?
Yes, they're really heavy, or no, I shouldn't say really heavy, because again, comparative to their size, but they, I believe, are around 15 pounds. Again, I'd have to double check my numbers on that. But yeah, and it's not necessarily that they're like, always picking them up and carrying them away, but they can use those huge talons to kill the prey that way. And then I'm sure you've all seen the videos of them like hucking goats off of cliffs and things like that. So they've evolved all kinds of crazy ways to be incredible predators. Yeah.
And the animal might not be dead when they're eating it anyway, just tearing out chunks, right? I mean,
yeah.
That's awful, but
nature is brutal, right?
Yeah. Oh, yuck.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have burrowing owls here in Montana?
We do, yeah. So out in eastern Montana, we have burrowing owls. And yeah, they'll use the dens of like pretty much any fossorial or digging animals. So, badgers and things like that, they'll use those dens to nest in. And that's a cool one. There's a cool, I don't know if you're familiar with our outdoor reports, the videos that the agency does, but there's been some cool research and some cool videos on burrowing owl research. So I definitely recommend looking those up too, because that's a really cool species. Yeah.
So if you're a burrowing owl or like the owls you're talking about that live in the prairie, how do they avoid predators themselves? Like a coyote?
Yeah, good question. They're definitely more susceptible to predators. But for the burrowing owls, they have a burrow, right? So they can kind of tuck down in there. But yeah, like the ground nester, the short-eared owl, they're definitely more susceptible to predators. They have really amazing camouflage. So that helps. And they're really fiercely protective of their nest. So, if something's going after the babies or the eggs, I mean, they won't back down. They'll swoop down and give them hell, but but yeah, they're certainly more susceptible in a way. And yeah, we at the Raptor Center in Bozeman, I know they have a short-eared owl that was injured by a tractor because it was on the ground on the nest, and they didn't see it on the ground. So yeah, not only more susceptible to animal predators, but humans and dogs and cats and other things too. So
Do they lay more eggs?
another thing I'm not sure about. I could look up clutch size, honestly, but it would make sense that they do. But
Because owls don't have very many eggs, right?
yeah, again, I'd have to look up for each species, but like I think for the great horned owl, it's usually like 2 to 4 eggs in a clutch. And they lay their eggs extremely early. They're some of the first breeders in the state. So great horned owls might start breeding as early as February. And their babies need kind of a longer time to get going, get all their feathers. They're pretty funny. They will sit in the nest and they're as big as the parents, but they're fluffy and ugly, like so ugly, they're cute kind of thing. But yeah, so they'll nest breed really early. And yeah, I'm not sure the clutch size for each owl species, but I would imagine that 2 to 4 is a pretty average for owls in general.
Okay. Can I ask? I'm sorry, Dave and Marla.
Yes.
Really, I have so many questions, but
No, it's good.
all over me. What do they do in a wildfire? Like,
Oh gosh, good question also. Fly away, I think. I mean,
like would they must know and sense, and it's not like they would just sit there and like.
right. Yes. I think that they would flee and fly away. I'm sure there's a lot of confusion among animals in general, like where to go, where to fly. But yeah, I don't know too much about that in general. I do know that after a few years after a forest fire, that's really good habitat for a lot of owl species because again, dead trees, lots of trees on the ground, which is then really good habitat for rodents. So wildfires, while they can be really destructive and devastating, they often do create really good habitat for a lot of species afterwards. So
Does she, especially when you first got her out, she kind of would like look at you and check. Do you feel like you have a relationship with her after?
yeah, definitely. So first of all, we have about 15 ambassador or educational birds, and we only would keep a bird as an ambassador raptor if they had sort of the right temperament, that they'll be comfortable. Not every wild owl could sit on your glove like this and just, while she looks a little nervous sometimes, she's clearly comfortable enough to just kind of, sit with me. But yeah, so we make sure they have the right temperament, that they're not going to spend their life stressed out and worried about things. And then as you train to hold different birds, yeah, it kind of starts out just chatting with them almost, getting them used to your presence, feeling them out as well, and then just sort of holding them in shorter increments. They all have their little quirks. Like every time you go to get her off of her perch, she bites really hard. So you want to have your glove positioned in a certain way, just little things like that. So yeah, you definitely get to know their individual personalities, which helps to make sure they're as comfortable as possible. But yeah, and again, I mean, she has such amazing vision that she's probably just picking up, like she keeps looking out the window. She's probably seeing every car that goes by and every bird that flies by and things like that. So it's good enrichment for them to get out and do things like this. But yeah, we put their comfort and safety first. So if they're not feeling it, if she was kind of freaking out, I would take a moment, put her down and continue on. So we kind of let them run the show, but. Yeah.
She's adorable. I mean, I know she's totally a predator, but she's adorable, even though
yeah,
you just want to hug her.
I know people always want to pet her because she looks very soft, but yeah, it's also hard to explain. I mean, they're not pets, right? They're wild animals. She would hate if I pet her, probably bite me really hard. But they're just comfortable enough to be able to have the important job of teaching students about their species and how to advocate for their species and things like that. So Yeah.
What's the owl lifespan? Does it depend on their size and their habitat?
Yeah, it depends on their size. Again, something I'm not sure of this species in particular, but many of them are like around 7 to 15, I would say would probably be a good average for owls in general. But we can often double or even triple their lifespan here at Montana Wild, because it's kind of the bird's spa, right? So they get they get fed every single day, you know, they never go hungry. They don't have any predators. As they age, much like us, they get, you know, achy joints and foggy eyes, which can affect their hunting in the wild, but wouldn't affect it here because we don't give them live prey. Again, because many of them are, have injuries that don't make them effective hunters. So the prey could honestly end up hurting them, or they could hurt themselves in the process of trying to get the prey. So they don't get fed live prey, but they get their natural diet. So mice and rats and birds and things like that. And this species in the wild would eat mostly rodents, but would also definitely eat small birds, reptiles, you know, snakes, things like that. So they have a pretty varied diet in the wild as well.
I suspect that what you're giving them doesn't have many parasites in it, so that would affect the lifespan also.
Yes, absolutely. That's a really good point. Yep. Yeah. So we give them high quality food. You know, generally they're from the mice we get are from a supplier. So yeah, not full of parasites and things like that. And then sometimes we'll get, for certain species, we'll get game meat donated. So we'll give them, but again, only their natural diet. We won't give them like, you know, chicken or burgers or anything like that. But yeah, so they have it pretty good for the most part.
So they're willing to eat the prey even if it's not moving?
Yep, these guys are, and they've just kind of gotten used to it for the most part. A lot of our rehab birds that come in that we are going to end up releasing, they'll often refuse. And so in that case, we will feed those rehab birds live prey under, you know, supervision and done safely. But we're really lucky. We have huge flight barns. So before we'll release an owl, say we'll put them in the flight barn, they'll get a couple weeks to fully regain their muscle strength to be able to fly. We won't release them unless they're almost 100% back to fully flighted. And then we'll sometimes do a prey test. So we'll offer them live prey, make sure they're back to hunting on their own, all that stuff. So yeah, sometimes the wild birds will not eat a dead mouse, but these guys all kind of know the drill by now. Another thing that happens to birds, a big reason we get some birds in, is imprinting. So especially in the springtime, owls and all birds get kicked out of the nest well before they can fly, because nests are tiny. Those little birds grow fast. They don't all fit in the nest anymore. They're gross. I mean, they're full of poop. The parents do a pretty good job of getting the poop out of there, but they're really, really gross. I've seen this experiment where they put like a nest under a grow light, and yeah, there was all kinds of stuff in there. But so yeah, the parents will kick them out and they'll hop around and look kind of cute and helpless, but the parents are still there feeding them, taking care of them, protecting them from smaller predators. But folks will find them and think they're abandoned, bring them into their house and start feeding them. And they're trying to do the right thing, but then they're imprints. So there's this really small window where they kind of associate with their own species. And so those imprints, we have a couple birds that are physically totally fine, but if you release them, if they're looking for food or even potentially a mate and that sort of thing, they end up like going to humans, you know, landing on someone's picnic table or this or that, or just like really unsure of how to hunt on their own or who their predators are. And so even those birds, even though they're physically fine, we can't release them. So we try to get a lot of messaging out in the spring about, you've probably heard the whole, if you care, leave it there. And, you know, call us if you have questions and that sort of thing, because that is a big issue we run into every spring.
Thank you, Corie. And I think we probably have time for one or two more questions. Kara, you said you had
perfect.
And then we'll let you and Kyla go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, anybody else?
Dave and Marlis, I don't want to hog the questions. Do you guys have any questions? No?
You were doing a good job.
Yeah, you have all had really good questions, and I have some Googling to do. People always know the specifics, like the clutches and the lifespan, and I need to just memorize those better.
Do owls close their eyes when they sleep?
Yeah, so they do, and
Yes, eyelid?
they have two eyelids. So they have, an eyelid that actually fully closes, and then they have a nictitating membrane. So it's a clear eyelid, and it actually, I think, shuts that like upwards and sort of diagonally. So they can kind of close that when they're going in to hunt, and it protects their eye but allows them to still be able to see. Yeah. Marlis says, my audio isn't working. Thank you so much. Okay, perfect. Wasn't sure if she had a question. Awesome. Okay, well, I'll also tell you, we have an owl ID quiz set up in the Montana Wild classroom right now. So you can come down and look at all of our different owl mounts and learn how to ID them and all that. I have this really handy Montana owls booklet. It has a whole page for each owl species with photos and the life history. I'm happy to mail that to anyone. So if you have addresses for anyone who wants it, let me know and I can mail you one of these. And we have owl posters too, which again, I'm happy to fold up and mail. So yeah, just let me know if you want more owl resources. I could even mail you an owl pellet if you want.